I want you to think about the last time you plugged your phone in to charge,
Right.
or the last time you asked an AI agent to draft an email, or even just paid your utility bill.
Yeah, totally mundane stuff.
Exactly. On the surface, just everyday actions. But those small pulls of electricity, they are aggregating at this terrifying speed, and they are actually triggering the largest infrastructure spending spree in European history.
It really is. We are talking about a structural deployment of 3.5 trillion euros.
Trillion with a T.
With a T. It's wild.
So to understand why utility companies are suddenly at the dead center of this multi-trillion euro revolution, we are doing a deep dive into this highly detailed April 2026 financial report from Goldman Sachs. It's called Powering Up Europe.
It's a fantastic piece of research.
It really is. And our mission today is to unpack the core conclusion of this report, which is this concept of hyper-electrification.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because 3.5 trillion euros isn't just an upgrade budget.
No, not at all.
That is the cost of physically rewiring an entire continent.
Yeah. I mean, it is a staggering amount of capital allocation. We're basically looking at a forced reset of how Europe generates, distributes, and just consumes energy.
And it's not happening in a vacuum, right?
Exactly. It's being squeezed into existence by these unprecedented pressures on both the supply side and the demand side.
Let's start with the supply side, because Europe is navigating its second major energy crunch in, what, less than 5 years?
Yeah, the trauma from the 2022 Russian gas crisis is definitely still fresh. And now we have the fallout from the 2026 Middle East crisis.
Right. And on the surface, those sound similar, but the mechanics hitting the power grid are actually completely different.
Totally different. The 2022 crisis was basically a localized heart attack for the European grid. In 2021, Russia supplied about 35 to 40% of Europe's natural gas.
Which is huge.
Massive, about 150 billion cubic meters. And by 2023, that vital pipeline was choked down to just 10%.
Just a devastating supply shock.
Exactly. It caused those infamous spikes in gas and power prices. But the 2026 Middle East crisis, that is a global oil shock.
Right, because the Gulf accounts for nearly 30% of the world's daily oil supply.
Yeah, around 23 million barrels a day. The disruption is massive for oil, but natural gas is way less impacted this time around. Only about 12% of Europe's LNG imports come from that region.
Mainly from Qatar, right?
Right. So gas is somewhat insulated, but the volatility is still tearing the European energy market in half.
Which brings up our first key piece of data. If you look at the forward power curves right now, the divide is stark. Gas-heavy countries like Italy, the UK, Germany, they're seeing these brutal double-digit percentage spikes in wholesale power.
Yeah, it's painful for them.
But then you look at grids dominated by renewables and nuclear.
Right.
Places like Spain, France, the Nordics, their power prices have barely twitched.
Barely moved at all.
They're sitting 40 to 50% lower than the gas-heavy nations.
What's fascinating here is the mechanism driving that massive price spread. It's called marginal price setting.
Oh, right, the merit order system.
Exactly. The grid dispatches the cheapest available power first, which is usually wind and solar, because the marginal cost to generate that next electron is basically zero.
The wind is free.
Right. But as demand climbs during the day, they have to turn on progressively more expensive plants. And in places like Germany, that final, most expensive plant required to meet peak demand is almost always a gas plant.
And under that system, that final expensive gas plant sets the price for the whole market.
Exactly. So global gas markets get jittery, and the electricity price for the whole grid skyrockets, even if a bunch of cheap wind was blowing earlier.
It's basically like renting an apartment from a really volatile landlord. Every geopolitical headline is a sudden rent hike that you just can't control.
That's a great analogy.
Building domestic renewables is like locking in a 30-year fixed mortgage. You own the infrastructure, the fuel is zero, and you isolate your balance sheet.
And the data proves it. Renewables aren't just for ESG compliance anymore. They are a definitively deflationary technology. They represent the ultimate localized form of sovereign energy security.
Okay, so Europe decides to aggressively lock in this 30-year solar and wind mortgage to get price stability. Great. But there's a huge flaw in that plan.
The demand shock.
Exactly. The blueprints become obsolete the second they break ground, because the size of the house they need just doubled.
Yeah, the demand side is a total reversal of a 15-year macroeconomic trend. Before 2024, European power demand was actually in structural decline.
Because of deindustrialization and efficiency mandates.
Right, planners were assuming flat or even negative load growth.
Then 2025 hits, and that downward trend line just violently snaps, which is our second key data point. Power demand officially inflected upwards, growing between 1% and 3%.
Which is driven largely by mobility and heating.
Yeah, we saw 2.5 million EVs sold and another 2.5 million electric heat pumps installed.
Adding that in 1 year is the energy equivalent of plugging 5 million brand new households into the European grid.
Yeah. It's a massive physical strain.
Yeah.
But at least EVs and heat pumps are predictable, right? You can model that. But then we hit the core driver of all this, the AI wall.
Yeah, AI is the chaotic variable blowing up all the load forecasts, specifically agentic AI.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The mechanical difference between a basic chatbot and an agentic AI is the core of this whole crisis. A basic 2024 chatbot is just a single prompt, single response. It's an isolated transaction.
You ask, it answers, it sleeps.
Right. But an agentic AI uses chain of thought. You don't ask a question, you give an objective.
Yeah.
Like, audit these 3 massive tax filings, cross-reference them with EU law, and draft a report.
And that agent silently breaks it into 50 subtasks.
Exactly. It queries, analyzes, loops back, iterates. It might run 50 to 100 cycles in the background before you can see a single word.
And that continuous processing state requires an exponential increase in GPU utilization. Goldman uses a highly conservative baseline for this. They assume an average intensity multiple of just 6 times a normal query.
Which is roughly 2 watt-hours per query.
Right. And even with that suppressed estimate, the impact is wild. They project that just a 10 percentage point increase in enterprise adoption of agentic AI could spike European data center energy needs by 25%.
Wait, a 25% spike?
Yeah.
We're talking about data centers consuming 25% of all European power demand by 2035. That's about 76 gigawatts of continuous power.
It's exactly why utility operators are tearing up the legacy playbooks. They used to plan for 1 or 2% growth. Now we are entering this hyper-electrification scenario where systemic power demand could compound at 5% annually by the end of the decade.
5% annual growth on a continental scale. Which brings us back to that massive investment advice angle and that 3.5 trillion euro figure.
Yeah. To meet this curve, power generation investments have to triple.
They need 2 trillion strictly for generation assets over the next 10 years.
And when you add the required high-voltage network upgrades, transformers, local distribution, you hit that 3.5 trillion euro threshold.
Okay, but I have to play the skeptic here. If I'm an investor, how do utilities actually make a viable return on that level of CapEx? Are the unit economics of a massive wind farm actually good enough?
It all comes down to the levelized cost of energy, or LCOE. This is our third key data point. LCOE takes the massive upfront cost, adds operating costs, and divides it by the total power produced over 30 years.
It gives you the true apples-to-apples cost.
Exactly. And the LCOE math dictates that utility-scale solar and onshore wind are currently the absolute cheapest ways to generate a megawatt-hour of electricity on the planet.
Assuming inflation stays in check.
Right. Over 30 years, assuming 2% inflation, the real LCOE of solar in Europe drops to 40 euros per megawatt hour.
Wow.
And onshore wind drops to roughly 25 euros per megawatt hour. Plus, once permitting is done, it only takes 6 to 18 months to physically install.
Speed and cost are great, but there's a fatal flaw here, which brings us to the core risk. Yeah. Intermittency.
Yep, weather dependency.
If you run a hyperscale data center with agentic AI managing a global supply chain, you can't have a voltage drop just because it got cloudy in Germany.
No, AI demands absolute, uncompromising baseload power. 100% capacity, 24/7.
And intermittent renewables can't do that without massive battery storage, which is way too expensive right now. So Europe needs baseload.
And historically, that was traditional nuclear, which currently supplies about 110 gigawatts. But that fleet is aging out, and there's only about 4 gigawatts of new traditional nuclear under construction.
Okay, let me get this straight. We are triggering this insanely energy-intensive leap with AI. We need 76 gigawatts by 2035. The nuclear fleet is aging out. How do we bridge this gap without rolling blackouts? Do we burn coal?
Sadly, yes. It's the ultimate paradox of the energy transition. The report highlights that the phase-out of legacy coal plants might have to be halted.
That is a staggering compromise. Shoveling coal into 1970s furnaces to run modern neural networks?
It's a highly polluting Band-Aid. But grid operators have to keep the grid from collapsing while they wait for the real structural solution.
Which is SMRs, right? Small modular reactors.
Exactly. Shifting from massive bespoke reactors to SMRs, a traditional plant takes 15 years and billions in overruns because every single one is a custom prototype.
But SMRs are, well, modular,
Yeah.
generated between 20 and 300 megawatts.
Right. They are mass-produced on an assembly line, built in a factory, shipped on flatbeds, and snapped together on site.
Which changes the whole financial equation.
Completely. Goldman estimates SMRs can be deployed in 9 to 10 years. And while early LCOE will be high, around 150 euros, assembly line efficiencies could drop that to 70 euros per megawatt hour by the 2030s.
And the forecast is 10 gigawatts of SMR capacity by 2040. But wait, if AI demand spikes by 2035 and SMRs don't scale until 2040, the timeline doesn't align.
It doesn't. And that mismatch, the desperation for baseload, the mandated shift to renewables, the massive capital needed, that is exactly why utilities are entering a generational earnings supercycle.
So what does this all mean?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the demand is mathematically guaranteed to skyrocket. And yet, if you look at the major integrated utilities like RWE or Ørsted, they are trading well below their historical mid-cycle averages.
The market still treats them like boring dividend stocks.
Right, completely ignoring that they are rapidly becoming hyperscale infrastructure juggernauts with the balance sheets to actually pull this off.
Right. So to wrap this up, the entire European grid is being rebuilt in real time with 3.5 trillion euros. And when you buy an EV or get a heat pump or use an AI agent to do your taxes, you are an active participant in this hyper-electrification.
Every prompt pulls a physical thread through an overstressed grid back to a wind turbine or an old coal plant. The utility sector is now the core engine room of the future digital economy.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to ponder. We are building these frictionless, limitless digital tools, but they're completely tethered to a highly constrained physical world of steel, copper, and aging grids.
It's a huge bottleneck.
It really is. Will our limitless appetite for digital convenience eventually crash headfirst into the very real physical limits of our power grids?
Yeah.
Definitely something to think about the next time you let an AI handle your heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
Just a quick reminder, this video is for research and analysis purposes only and does not constitute any investment advice. Please be sure to subscribe to this channel. The next video will be even more exciting. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and keep questioning the world around you.